So today is August 23rd of 2016. It's a day that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. Why? Well, for starters, Madden 17 comes out today. I'm not going to lie, I'm very excited about Madden 17 as I am with Madden every year. It is a rite of passage for me. I'm especially looking forward to the new presentation, the new commentary model, as well as the different gameplay features. And I heard that franchise is better this year. Certainly looking forward to it. And I may even do a bit of streaming at some point in the not too distant future. But the main reason that I'm excited about today is that today is the silver anniversary of the launch of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, which came out on August 23rd, 1991. It's been 25 years, and it is one of my favorite consoles of all time. Not the all time favorite, that is the NES, and will be the NES until the day that I'm dead. But the Super NES came out at a very interesting time in my life. I wrote an article for RetroWare, which will hopefully, got my fingers crossed, be up later today. If not today, then hopefully by the end of the week, where I talk about 1991, about the big movies, music, and TV shows at the time in order to set the stage. I talk about the games a little bit, and then I talk more in detail about how the system affected me, the memories and the milestones in my life that come to mind when I think about the Super NES. But what I want to do in this video is I want to talk a little bit about the 5 launch games for August, and I want to talk about the importance of how I was able to play it without actually getting the system at launch, because I couldn't afford it. I was spending money so quickly that by the time August 23rd came around, I was still broke. I didn't have any money put away to afford the system or to afford the games. And I didn't have a line of credit or anything because I was brand new in the workforce. I hadn't established any credit to that point. So in order to play the system, a couple of friends in the circle of friends that I hung out with had bought the Super NES, including another Pete, who was really the foundation member of this circle of friends that I hung out with. All of us would hang out at his house. We would show up, if we were off, we would show up between 10 and 11 o'clock in the morning. If we were working that day, hopefully it was a split shift so we could come over in the afternoon for a couple of hours. And we would play games at his house. We would play games, we would order pizza or grinders, we would listen to music. It was a young adult's paradise. It was, man, I'll tell you, if I had unlimited resources, I would have a place just like that. And I would need to move closer to some friends so I could invite them over to have the same kind of experience. But it's one of the reasons why I've struggled with wanting to grow up, because back then growing up was not the thing. It was just living life to the fullest. And during the day when you weren't working or when you didn't, when you weren't hanging out with a significant other or doing family stuff, hanging out with friends and playing video games was what we did, and it was absolutely glorious. So we had access to all 5 of the launch games in August of 1991. I didn't own any of them yet. I didn't buy them until I bought the system a few weeks later. But between a couple of people in the group, we had all of the games covered. So what I'd like to do is talk about those games one by one, just a little bit. Talk about my impressions of them then and whether my opinions have changed now. We'll start with Super Mario World because how can you not? It is probably the most recognizable launch title. It is the 4th in the line of the Super Mario Brothers games. It has multiple goals. It has stereo sound. It has scaling and rotation. It has secrets like you wouldn't believe. It has Yoshi. You can fly around at will if you have the cape. I mean, it's. I could make an entire video talking about it. Interestingly, it's not my favorite of the Super Mario Brothers games. That honor belongs to Super Mario 3, but I do openly admit that some of that just comes from nostalgia that comes with my adoration of the wizard, and how Super Mario 3 was really the centerpiece of the ending. So I played a lot of Super Mario 3. Super Mario 3 was one of the first NES games that I got when I got the system for Christmas in 1990. So it's always going to have that special place. I don't deny that it's a very subjective pick and has it not objective at all, because Super Mario World does so many other things that are arguably better, and so I admit that. But nevertheless, Super Mario World still holds up very well today. I was just playing it on the 3DS earlier tonight, and it's a joy to play. It does get hard in spots, but that's where hanging out with friends came in. If you were playing through a level and you're like, damn it, I don't know how to do this, or I've lost 4 lives here. Can you help me out? You could actually tag in a friend of yours to try and help you through it. Maybe a fresh set of eyes or fresher reflexes would help. And you can't really do that anymore if you don't have friends over. If you're playing against someone online, it's more competitive or cooperative where you're playing at the same time and it's not that alternating, pass the controller around kind of experience. But yeah, if you don't have access to Super Mario World, whether it's through your 3DS, your Wii, or good old Super Nintendo cart from 1991, that I can't I can't recommend it enough. Go get it if you haven't played it. It still holds up very well today and is very much worth your time. The next game that I want to talk about is my favorite of the 5 launch titles, and that is F-Zero. I am an arcade guy through and through. Did a lot of my childhood experience, had a lot of that in arcades. When I wasn't in school, I was in an arcade somewhere unless I didn't have the money or I couldn't get a ride. And F-Zero is very much an arcade racing experience with a bit of futurism thrown in there with hovercraft instead of vehicles with wheels. But the tracks are just the right kind of challenging. There's enough of a difficulty spread where anybody can play the game and at least feel like they're doing well. The music is iconic. I can still hear Mute City in my head just thinking about it. The scaling and rotation back in 1991, a home system that could do that, just absolutely mind-blowing. I think about it whenever I pop the game into my Super Nintendo now. Just how blown away I was by seeing the track just kind of spin around, or how smooth you could take the corners, and all at 60 frames a second. It was it was glorious, and it's still very playable today. And of course, I got the I got the sequels. I got F-Zero X for the 64, which I adore, especially for the soundtrack. But the game plays very well. And even F-Zero GX, which kicks my ass, and I really don't like that all that much. But the game is phenomenal looking. I need to get the Game Boy Advance games at some point. But F-Zero is another game that I think holds up very well today. And if you can play it either on a Super NES or via Virtual Console somewhere, get on it. It's worth it. There was also SimCity, which unfortunately I have very little experience with. I have no patience for those games because I find them to be boring and tedious. I understand why people may get a kick out of them. They like that kind of organization, that kind of micromanagement. It's just not for me. The closest I've ever gotten to liking a sim game of any kind was the sim aspect in ActRaiser, which doesn't last very long and is very rudimentary. So SimCity, I have it in my library. I think I've played it for a total of 10 minutes once when I first got the cartridge, and I haven't touched it since. But what are you going to do? The last of the first-party launch titles was Pilot Wings, and this is a very interesting title because it's a game that totally turned me off the first time I played it. Pete, the guy who owned the house that we all hung out with, he was the big aviation guy, had Flight Simulator for his computer, and he was big into Top Gun. I remember how mad he was that I was able to land the F-14 the very first time we played Top Gun together in the late 80s. But he thought Pilot Wings was awesome, and he did very well at it. And I didn't have the patience because I thought it was too slow. It's one of those games you just kind of have to let yourself go and just play at will rather than expecting things to be blowing up all around you. Again, it's part of my arcade sensibility. If I'm not surrounded with some kind of stimulus, then I don't really get a lot out of it. I've come to appreciate Pilot Wings a lot more in my old age, as I'm now in my mid-40s. I can sit and I can play Pilot Wings, or I can play Pilot Wings 64 or Resort on the 3DS, and I can enjoy it, but back then I really had difficulty with it. I'm still not very good. My friend Chris with Classic Gaming Quarterly, he did a great video on the launch of the Super NES, a great video recap. And he shot some game capture footage of him landing on some of the targets with the rocket belt and other craft, and I had to go and try it. I finally did it for the first time, but it took me forever in order to get it done. It's a great game to play now, but just go into it very chill. Don't expect a lot of action, at least not at first, but it's a fun game to play, at least in spurts. And then the last of the launch games from August of 1991 is Gradius 3, which I actually played a lot earlier today. And man, that soundtrack is good. Oh man, I almost beat the game for the first time today. It's taken me 25 years to get this close. I know I was on the last stage of the game, and there were a couple of creatures that kind of walked along the top and the bottom of the stage, and you have to time your ship to fly when the leg is up and then over. And I couldn't do that very well, so I went from 7 lives in reserve to 0. I was actually having a phenomenal run. I hadn't died up until that point, and then I lost all of my lives in succession. Nevertheless, though, the game is a blast to play. I think the only thing that stuck out to me back then, and sticks out to me even more now, is just the level of slowdown in the game. You see it especially in the bubble stage, which I think is the second stage of the game, might be the third. When there are a bunch of bubbles on the screen, a bunch of enemies on the screen, there is a lot of slowdown that takes place, which can help in a shooter game like that, but nonetheless, very recognizable. Do I recommend it for play now? I think I do. It's certainly an example of a shooter back in 1991, and it really set the stage for what was a dominant period for Konami on 16-bit platforms, especially the Super NES. I mean, we're talking about a company that gave us Turtles in Time and Sunset Riders and Tiny Toon Adventures and Cybernator they had converted. Axelay, which is one of my favorite shooters of all time. I mean, they had some slip-ups. Konami NFL Football is one of the worst football games I've ever played, but that's a topic for another time. But Gradius 3, just playing that today, I could see in my mind's eye, I could actually see myself sitting on that couch at Pete's house. I could almost smell the pizza, and I can hear the guys yelling at me because I narrowly avoided dying. And that was really, really cool. So, happy 25th Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Thank you very much for 25 years of memories, of joy, of fun, and most importantly, of gameplay. Take care, everybody.